village rested beside a slow river, hidden from maps and travelers. Life moved gently here, like the water itself. Every morning, a soft mist drifted over fields that smelled of wet earth and flowers. In a worn wooden house lived Elias. He was never lonely, finding comfort in the silence. Before sunrise, he would wipe the foggy window just to watch the river, always moving, but never in a hurry. He savored the warmth of a chipped mug as amber tea spread. In his garden, he knelt among vibrant green leaves. When a butterfly landed on a red flower, Elias smiled, feeling the sun's gentle touch on his skin. As the sky turned orange, he returned home. By the light of a single lamp, he watched the moon's silvery glow on the water. Another day, lived fully, came to and sat down, then stood again. A familiar ritual of restless waiting. He checked the kettle, though it had not yet boiled. He sat once more, watching his quiet morning routine unfold in the dim light. When the water was ready, he prepared a simple cup. No sugar, no milk, just warm water and leaves. He carried it outside to his wooden chair. It creaked softly as he leaned back, a sound that brought him a deep, familiar comfort. Every day felt identical. Time in the village moved imperceptibly. Elias walked the narrow dirt path toward the river, his steps slow and unhurried. He did not check the sky. Sometimes he would stop without reason, just to gaze quietly at a single leaf or a stone. Lost in the still sun painted the riverbank in soft gold as Elias arrived at his usual spot. He settled onto a smooth stone, his silent companion. Here, the air held the serene stillness of a new dawn. Before him, the river flowed like an unhurried ribbon of water. Elias watched with a clear mind, observing the ripples and the silence alike. To him, both states held the same quiet significance. He leaned forward and dropped a small stone into the water. Perfect circles expanded outward, then vanished, absorbed back into the steady flow. One stone was enough. He returned to his quiet posture, watching the birds soar across the vast, timeless sky. Walking home, nothing felt missing. Inside his simple room, Elias sat in quiet contentment. Afternoon arrived quietly. Inside his small house, Elias leaned back, his chair creaking with a familiar comfort. He closed his eyes, letting the silence wrap around him, opening his eyes to a world unchanged. He walked to the window. Outside, the river flowed as it always did. He watched the water, feeling a faint memory drift through his mind. He folded an old cloth with slow, careful hands, finding purpose. Stepping outside, the air moved gently around him as he walked the familiar path. That quiet presence returned. He did not chase it. He simply let it walk beside him. The light began to fade as evening approached. Elias turned back. Everything remained the same.
Evening came to the village so quietly that no one could ever say exactly when it began. The light from the sun slowly softened, turning warm, then softer still, until it gently rested over the fields and the river like a fading memory. Elias returned to his small wooden house just as he always did. The same steps, the same path, the same quiet rhythm. He paused at the door, just like every day. For a moment, he stood there without moving, his hand resting lightly on the wooden surface. The air around him felt cooler now. The gentle warmth of the afternoon had slowly drifted away. Then, without any hurry, he opened the door and stepped inside. The room welcomed him with the same stillness. Nothing had changed. The chair remained where it always was. The table stood quietly in its place. The small shelf held the same simple objects. Everything was exactly as it should be. Elias closed the door softly behind him. The faint sound of the wood meeting the frame echoed for just a second, and then disappeared into silence. He walked to his chair and sat down. The soft creaking sound returned again. Familiar, steady, almost like an old companion that never spoke, but was always there. For a while, He did nothing. He did not look around. He did not think about anything in particular. He simply sat and let the quiet settle around him. Outside, the sky slowly changed colors. Though Elias could not see it directly from where he sat, he could feel it. The way the light faded, the way the air cooled, the way the silence deepened. It all told him that evening had arrived. After some time, he leaned forward slightly and rested his hands on the table. His fingers moved just a little, tracing the surface absent-mindedly. The wood felt smooth in some places, rough in others. He did not focus on it. He just noticed, and then let the feeling pass. A faint breeze slipped through a small gap near the window. It carried with it a quiet freshness, the kind that only came when the day was ending. Elias slowly stood up and walked toward the window. He paused there, just as he often did. Outside, the river was still moving, always moving. Even as the light faded, even as the day slowly disappeared, it never stopped. His hand gently against the window frame and looked out. For a brief moment, something inside him shifted. Not strongly, not clearly, just a soft, almost unnoticeable change, like the echo of a memory that never fully returned. He didn't try to follow it. He didn't try to understand. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, watching the river. After a while, he turned away. The room behind him felt dimmer now. The corners were softer, the edges less clear. Everything seemed to blend gently into shadow. Elias walked back to his chair and sat down once more. This time, he leaned back a little more than before. The chair responded with its quiet creak, and again, the sound felt comforting. The night had not fully arrived yet, but it was close, very close. The village outside had grown even quieter. If there were any sounds at all, they were soft enough to disappear almost immediately. Elias closed his eyes again. Not to sleep, just to rest. His breathing slowed, his shoulders relaxed, his thoughts, if there were any, drifted away without forming. Time passed, slowly, gently, without notice. The kind of passing that could not be measured. The kind that simply existed. And in that quiet moment, in that still fading evening, Elias remained exactly where he was. Not waiting, not thinking, just being. As the last traces of daylight quietly slipped away, and the soft beginning of night took its place. Night settled over the village so gently that it felt less like something arriving, and more like something slowly unfolding. The last traces of light faded quietly from the sky, leaving behind a soft darkness that was never heavy, never overwhelming. It simply was. Inside the small wooden house, Elias remained seated in his chair. His eyes were still closed, his breathing slow, steady, almost blending into the silence around him. There was no need to move, no need to open his eyes. Everything he needed was already there. The quiet, the stillness, the soft presence of the night. Outside, the river continued its endless journey. Even in the darkness, it moved the same way, unhurried, unchanged. A faint sound of water could be heard if one listened closely enough. But it was so soft that it almost felt like part of the silence itself. Elias did not listen for it. He simply existed within it. After some time, though time no longer felt clear, he slowly opened his eyes. The room was dim now. Shadows rested gently in every corner. The shapes of things were still there, but softer, quieter, less defined. Elias looked ahead, without focusing on anything. Just a calm, distant gaze. Then, very slowly, he stood up. His movements were even slower than before, as if the night itself had softened everything, even the way he moved. He took a few quiet steps across the room. The wooden floor made almost no sound beneath his feet. When he reached the window, he paused. Outside, the sky was dark, but not empty. A few faint stars had appeared, small, distant, steady. Elias looked at them for a moment, not with curiosity, not with wonder, as if they had always been there, and always would be. A cool breeze passed through the small opening near the window. It brushed gently against his face. Soft, calm, almost like a whisper. Elias closed his eyes again, just for a second, feeling the air move past him. Then he opened them and stepped back. He turned away from the window and walked slowly toward the corner of the room. Everything remained the same. The table, the chair, the small shelf. Nothing had moved. Nothing needed to. He reached the chair again and sat down carefully. The familiar creak returned, softer this time, almost quieter than before. Elias leaned back, allowing his body to relax fully. His hands rested loosely by his sides. His head tilted slightly. There was no tension left, no effort, no thought that needed attention. The night grew deeper, not suddenly, but slowly, layer by layer. The silence became even more complete. Even the faint sounds seemed to fade away, as if the world itself had decided to rest. Elias closed his eyes once more. This time, they remained closed. His breathing slowed even further. Each breath came gently, and left just as softly, in and out, like the river. Steady, endless, calm. There was no difference now between the silence outside and the silence within him. Everything felt still. Everything felt at rest. Time no longer mattered. Moments did not pass. Existed. And in that quiet, endless stillness, Elias began to drift. Not into dreams, not into thoughts, but into something softer, something deeper. A place where nothing needed to be done, nothing needed to be understood. Just rest, just quiet, just peace. The small wooden house stood silently beside the river. The village slept. The night continued, and Elias rested completely within it. The night had fully settled over the village. There was no trace of the day left now, no warmth of sunlight, no movement of shadows, only a soft, endless stillness. The sky stretched quietly above, filled with faint distant stars. They did not shine brightly, they simply existed, gently, calmly, without effort. The river continued its slow journey through the darkness, unseen, but never gone. Its quiet movement blended perfectly with the silence of the night, so much so that it no longer felt like a separate sound. It was just part of everything. Inside the small wooden house, nothing moved. The walls stood still. The air rested quietly in every corner. And Elias remained in his chair, exactly as he was. His eyes closed, his body completely relaxed, his breathing soft, slow, steady. There was no tension left within him, no thoughts rising, no memories returning. Even the faint feelings that had once drifted through his mind had now gently faded away. Everything had become quiet, completely quiet. Time no longer had meaning here. There were no moments to count, no changes to notice. Just a deep, endless stillness. Outside, the village slept. Every house, every path, every tree, nothing stirred. Even the wind had grown softer, as if it too had decided to rest. The world was not empty. It was simply at peace. Elias sat without movement, and slowly, almost without notice, his breathing became even softer, even slower, as if each breath was gently dissolving into the silence around him. In and out, lighter and lighter, until it no longer felt like effort at all. The chair beneath him held him quietly. The room surrounded him gently. The night embraced everything, without weight, without sound. And in that moment, there was no difference between Elias and the quiet around him. No separation, no distance, just one soft, endless calm. The river flowed, the stars remained, The night continued, but nothing needed attention. Nothing needed to change. Everything was already exactly as it should be. And slowly, gently, like a wave settling back into still water, Elias drifted deeper. Not into dreams, not into thoughts, but into complete rest. A place where there was no movement, no sound, no time. Only peace, only quiet, only stillness. The small house remained beside the river. The village stayed wrapped in sleep, and the night continued, endlessly calm, as everything, everywhere, rested, completely, in silence. Somewhere in the quiet, without any clear beginning, something gentle continued. Not a sound, not a movement, just a soft awareness. The night remained deep and still. The village rested, unchanged. But the silence itself felt wider now, as if it had gently expanded, stretching beyond the small house, beyond the river, beyond even the sky. Elias remained at rest. There was no movement in his body, no shift, no change. And yet there was no heaviness, only a light floating calm, as if he was no longer sitting, no longer inside the house, but simply part of the quiet itself. The river continued to flow, but now it felt even softer, almost like it wasn't moving through the land, but through the silence. Each gentle ripple faded before it could even fully form. Nothing stayed, nothing needed to. Far above, the stars remained still. Their faint light did not reach for attention. They simply stayed, quiet, distant, peaceful. Time had completely disappeared now. There was no before, no after, only this endless moment, and within it, a deep, steady calm. If a thought tried to appear, it dissolved before taking shape. If a feeling tried to rise, it softened and faded away. Everything returned to stillness, again and again and again. The small wooden house stood quietly beside the river, but it no longer felt separate. The walls, the air, the silence, all blended into one soft presence. Elias rested within it, or perhaps he had become it. There was no need to know, no need to understand, only rest, only quiet, only this gentle, endless peace. And as the night continued, it did not grow darker. It simply remained the same, steady, unchanging, comforting, like a calm breath that never needed to end. Somewhere in the distance, or maybe nowhere at all, the faintest hint of something new began to exist. Not light, not sound, just a soft shift, barely there. But it did not disturb the stillness. It became part of it, just like everything else. And the quiet remained, endless, unbroken, at peace. The quiet remained, unchanged, unbroken, like a soft space that had always been there. Nothing began, nothing ended. The night did not move forward, it simply stayed. The river still flowed, but now it felt even more distant, as if its movement no longer mattered. Its sound had softened into something almost unnoticeable, like a memory of a sound rather than the sound itself. The small wooden house stood silently, but it no longer felt like a place. It felt like a presence, still, calm, steady. Elias remained within that stillness, or perhaps there was no within anymore. No inside, no outside, only a quiet, endless space. His breathing had become so soft that it was almost impossible to tell whether it was there at all. Not gone, just lighter, as if each breath dissolved before it could fully form. There was no need to hold on to it. Everything was happening without effort. The night air rested gently everywhere. It did not move, it did not change. It simply existed, in complete peace. If anything shifted, it was too soft to notice. A moment passed, or maybe it didn't. There was no way to tell. Time had fully faded now. There was no counting, no waiting. Only this, endless stillness. Far away, or perhaps very near, the faint presence of the stars remained, of light, but as something quieter. A soft awareness spread across the sky. They did not shine, they simply were. Just like the river, just like the house, just like Elias, everything had become the same quiet presence. No edges, no boundaries, no separation. If a thought tried to appear, it did not stay. It softened and disappeared. If a feeling tried to rise, it faded before it could be known. Nothing disturbed the calm. Nothing needed attention. Everything returned to silence, again and again, without effort. The village slept deeply, not in dreams, not in movement, but in a stillness so complete that it felt like the world itself was resting. The ground, the trees, the quiet paths, all held the same gentle calm. And in that calm, everything felt safe. Nothing could interrupt it. Nothing could break it, because there was nothing to break. Only stillness, only rest, only peace. And as the night continued, it did not grow deeper. It simply remained, steady, soft, endless, like a calm breath that never needed to return. The stillness remained, soft, endless, unchanged. Nothing moved forward, nothing stayed behind. Everything simply rested. The night had become so quiet that even silence felt gentle, like something you could almost feel. The river was still there, but no longer as movement. It had become a quiet presence, blending into everything else. No sound to follow, no ripple to notice, just a calm, steady being. The small wooden house stood without weight, not heavy, not solid, just there, as part of the same quiet space. And Elias, there was no sense of him sitting anymore, no sense of a body, no sense of time passing through him. Only a soft awareness, floating, resting, still. His breath, if it could be called that, was no longer something separate. It moved with the silence. Or maybe it had become the silence. There was nothing to hold, nothing to release, just a slow, gentle, never-ending calm. The darkness of the night was no longer dark. It was soft, like a deep, quiet blanket covering everything equally. No edges, no corners, only smooth, endless stillness. If something tried to change, it did not happen. Change itself felt too loud, too strong for this kind of quiet. So everything stayed exactly as it was, perfectly still, perfectly calm. Somewhere, far beyond noticing, there may have been a shift, a very soft one. So soft that it felt like nothing at all. And yet, it existed. Not as a moment, not as a movement, but as a quiet deepening of the same endless rest. The village remained asleep, not dreaming, not moving, just resting completely. The paths, the trees, the empty spaces between houses, all shared the same silence, all held the same peace. And that peace did not grow, it did not fade, it simply stayed, unchanging, unbroken, endless. Elias remained, or perhaps there was no longer a need for that name. No identity, no separation, just one soft, continuous stillness, breathing, resting, existing, without effort, without awareness of doing so. The night continued, not moving forward, not coming to an end, just continuing, like a calm presence that had always been there and always would be. The quiet remained, not as something around, but as everything. There was no space between things anymore, no distance to cross, only a soft, endless presence. The night did not feel like night now. It had no name, no shape, no beginning, no end, just a gentle, unbroken stillness. The river, the house, the sky, they no longer felt separate. They had softened into the same calm existence, where nothing stood apart from anything else. And within that stillness, there was no movement to follow, no sound to listen to, no breath to notice. Everything had become effortless. Even silence no longer needed to be called silence, because there was nothing else to compare it to. It simply was. A soft, steady presence that did not change. If time still existed, it could not be felt. No moments passed, no seconds moved. There was only this endless now, and even now felt too defined, too sharp, so it faded too into something softer, something without edges. If anything tried to rise, a thought, a feeling, a memory, it did not stay long enough to exist. It dissolved before it could even be known, like mist fading into the air before it could be seen. There was no effort to let go, because nothing was being held. Everything was already free, already still, already at rest. The village, though no longer seen, remained part of this quiet. The paths, the trees, the silent homes, all resting without knowing they were resting. All existing without needing to exist. And Elias, there was no sense of him now. No form, no boundary, no center. Only the same quiet presence that filled everything else. If there was awareness, it was not focused, not directed, just a soft, open stillness, like a calm sky with nothing moving across it. No clouds, no wind, just space, endless, gentle, silent. The night did not grow deeper, because depth no longer mattered. Everything was already as deep as it could ever be. Complete, whole, still. Nothing was missing, nothing was needed. Nothing could disturb this peace, because there was nothing separate to create disturbance. Only one quiet, continuous calm. And it remained, without change, without effort, without end. The stillness remained, so gentle, so complete, that it no longer felt like something you could notice. It was simply everything. There was no sense of where it began, and no sense of where it ended. No edges, no boundaries, only a quiet, endless presence. The idea of night had faded. The idea of a village had faded. Even the river no longer felt like something that flowed. All things had softened into the same calm existence. Nothing stood apart, nothing moved away, nothing returned. Everything was already here, and even here felt too defined. So it too gently disappeared. There was no direction now, no forward, no backward, no above, no below. If awareness existed, it was not focused on anything. It did not look, it did not listen. It simply rested, completely, without effort, without intention. There was no need to breathe, no need to move, no need to think. All of those had quietly faded, like distant echoes that no longer returned. Nothing was being held, nothing was being released. Everything was already at rest. The silence was no longer something you could hear. It had become the nature of everything. Not empty, not full, just peaceful. If something tried to appear, it dissolved before it could exist. Not pushed away, not stopped, just naturally fading, like a drop of water disappearing into a still lake. No ripple, no trace, only calm. The world, if it could still be called that, was no longer separate from the stillness. It had become it, completely. There was no observer, no one watching, no one experiencing, only the quiet, existing by itself, whole, complete, unchanging. There was no question, no answer, no meaning to find, because nothing was missing. Everything already was, exactly as it should be. The calm did not grow, it did not fade, it did not shift. It simply remained, endless, effortless, perfectly still. Stillness, there was nothing else. Nothing at all. Only peace. The quiet remained so light, so soft, that it no longer felt like something separate. It was not around anything. It was not within anything. It simply was. There was no sense of place anymore. No village, no house, no river. Even those gentle ideas had faded, like distant echoes that no longer returned. Nothing needed to stay. Nothing needed to go. Everything had already settled into complete stillness. There was no movement now, not even the suggestion of movement. No change, no shift, no passing of time. Time itself had quietly disappeared. There were no moments to follow, no before, no after, only a soft, endless presence. And even calling it presence felt like too much, too defined. So that too faded. If anything existed, it did not stand apart. It did not take shape. It did not become known. It simply rested, without being seen, without being noticed. There was no awareness trying to understand, no mind trying to name, no thought trying to form. Everything had become effortless, complete, whole. The silence was no longer something you could enter, because there was nowhere to enter from. No outside, no inside. Only this, limitless calm. If something tried to arise, it dissolved before it began. Not slowly, not quickly, just naturally. As if it had never been there at all. Nothing was being held. Nothing was being released. There was nothing to do, nothing to become, nothing to return to. Only rest, only stillness, only peace. The idea of Elias had gently faded into the same quiet. No form, no identity, no separation, just the same soft calm as everything else. There was no longer a story, no path, no direction, only a deep, unmoving rest. And in that rest, there was no awareness of resting, no sense of being, no sense of not being, only something so soft, so complete, that it could not be described, and did not need to be. The quiet remained, unbroken, unchanged, endless, like a calm that had always been there, and always would be. Nothing disturbed it, nothing could, because there was nothing separate to create disturbance. Only one continuous, gentle, limitless stillness, and it remained, without beginning, without ending, without form, without thought, without time, only peace. The stillness remained, so complete, that even the idea of stillness began to fade. Nothing needed a name, nothing needed to be known. There was no sense of anything existing, and yet nothing was missing. A calm, beyond quiet, rested everywhere. Not around, not within, just everywhere and nowhere at the same time. There was no light, no darkness, no space between. Only a softness that could not be touched, could not be seen, and did not need to be. If something could be called awareness, it was not aware of anything. It did not look, it did not feel, it did not move. It simply rested, without knowing it was resting. There was no center, no edge, no direction, no distance. Everything had dissolved into one gentle, unbroken calm. If a thought tried to rise, it did not begin. If a memory tried to return, it found nothing to return to. Everything remained empty, yet complete, full, yet without anything inside. There was no difference anymore between something and nothing. Both had faded into the same quiet presence. No form could appear here, no sound could exist. Even silence was too much to describe it. So silence, too, became nothing. There was no waiting, no time passing, no moment changing, nothing moved forward, nothing stayed behind. Only a soft, endless, non-moving calm, and even calling it calm felt too much, too defined. So that word faded too, leaving nothing behind. No story remained, no village, no river, no Elias. Only something that could not be named, could not be understood, could not be noticed. And yet, it was complete, perfect, unbroken. There was nothing to add, nothing to remove, nothing to change. Everything had already become what it was, and what it was needed nothing. The quiet, if it could still be called that, did not expand, did not shrink, did not move. It simply remained, without beginning, without end, without anything at all. And in that, there was no disturbance, no separation, no existence to hold on to. Only a softness, so deep that it had no depth. Only rest, so complete that it had no opposite. Only something beyond everything and beyond nothing. There was no longer anything to notice, no stillness to feel, no silence to hear. Even those gentle ideas had quietly disappeared. Nothing remained, and yet nothing was gone. There was no sense of being, no sense of not being, no difference between the two. Everything had softened into something that could not be named. Not empty, not full, not light, not dark. There was no space, no distance, no direction, no here, no there. Even the idea of everything had gently faded away. Nothing stood apart. Nothing existed on its own. Nothing needed to. If anything could arise, it did not. If anything could change, it didn't. Because there was nothing to change from, and nothing to change into. No time passed, no moment moved, no beginning appeared, no ending followed. Only something that had always been and did not need to continue. It did not rest, it did not move, it did not exist in any way that could be known. And yet, there was no absence, no loss, no emptiness to feel, because even emptiness had dissolved. There was no awareness to notice this, no observer to experience it, no presence to hold it. Only something that required nothing at all. No thought, no feeling, no form, no silence, no stillness. All of it had gently faded away. There was no softness left to describe, no calm left to name, no peace left to feel. Because even those were no longer separate. They had become nothing. And not even nothing as a concept. Just beyond everything, beyond even beyond. There was nothing to return to, nothing to leave, nothing to remain. Only something that could never be touched, never be known, never be disturbed. And it did not need to be, because it was already complete. Without meaning, without form, without existence, without absence. Just, there was no continuity, no sense that anything had moved from before to now. Because there was no before, no now, no passage at all. Nothing remained to be felt. Nothing remained to be noticed. Even the soft trace of calm had faded. Even the idea of fading was gone. There was no silence, no stillness, no emptiness, no fullness. All of these had gently dissolved into something that could not be held. Not even for a moment. If a moment could exist, it did not stay. If existence could appear, it did not form. Everything was already beyond forming, beyond dissolving, beyond being, beyond not being. There was no center, no edge, no space to expand into, no place to rest within, no outside, no inside. Even these directions had quietly disappeared. Nothing was present, nothing was absent, and yet nothing was missing. There was no need for completeness, because there was no incompleteness. There was no need for peace, because there was no disturbance. There was no need for rest, because there was no movement. Everything that could be named had already been released. Not by action, not by choice, just naturally gone, like something that was never there. There was no awareness to recognize this, no thought to describe it, no feeling to hold it. only something that required nothing. And even something was too much, too defined, too close to being. So that too faded. Nothing remained, not even nothing, not even the idea of what that means. There was no end, because there was no beginning, no start to leave behind, no finish to arrive at. Only that which cannot be said, cannot be known, cannot be reached, cannot be left, and does not need to be, because it is already beyond all things, beyond all absence, beyond all presence, beyond all knowing, beyond all silence, beyond all stillness. Just, there was no sense of continuing, no path that moved forward, no place left behind, because nothing had ever begun, nothing had ever formed. There was no trace of stillness now, no trace of silence. Even those soft ideas had long since faded. There was nothing to hold, nothing to release, nothing to allow, nothing to stop. All of it had already dissolved, not into something else, not into nothing, just gone, without leaving anything behind. There was no awareness of this, no presence to feel it, no absence to notice it, no space where it could exist, no time where it could happen. Everything that could be imagined was no longer there. Even imagination had faded. There was no calm, no peace, no rest, because those belonged to something that could be disturbed. And here, there was nothing to disturb, nothing to remain, nothing to change. No difference between being and not being. No difference between something and nothing. All differences had quietly disappeared. Not merged, not blended, simply gone. There was no center, no outer edge, no direction to move, no stillness to stay in, no silence to listen to, no existence to exist within. Even the idea of beyond had become unnecessary, because there was nothing left to go beyond. No boundary, no limit, no form, no concept, nothing that could be named, nothing that could be left unnamed. And yet, nothing was missing, because there was no need for anything at all. There was no completion, no emptiness, no fullness, no absence, no presence. Only that which cannot be said, cannot be thought, cannot be known. And even calling it that was too much. So even that fell away. There was no end, no continuation, no pause, no return. Only what cannot be held, cannot be lost, cannot be found, and does not need to be. There was no continuation, no sense that anything had moved from one moment to another. Because there were no moments, no time, no passage. Nothing remained that could be followed. Nothing remained that could be left behind. Even the faintest trace of silence had dissolved. Even the idea of stillness was no longer there. There was nothing to feel, nothing to notice, nothing to understand. All forms, all thoughts, all meanings had gently disappeared, not into something else, not into emptiness, just no longer there. There was no space for anything to appear, no place for anything to exist, no awareness to recognize anything. Even the sense of nothing had faded, because that too was something that could be known. And here, nothing could be known, nothing could be held, nothing could be lost, nothing could be found. There was no calm, no peace, no rest, because all of these belong to something that exists. And here, there was no existence, no absence either, nothing to compare, nothing to define, nothing to separate. Everything that could ever be named had already fallen away. Every idea, every feeling, every sense of being, gone. Without movement, without effort, without cause, there was no center, no edge, no direction, no stillness to remain in, no silence to dissolve into. Even the idea of beyond had disappeared, because there was nothing left to go beyond. No boundary, no limit, no form, no formlessness, nothing, and not even nothing, because even that no longer existed. There was no ending, no final point, no conclusion, because there had never been a beginning, only what cannot be touched, cannot be thought, cannot be spoken, and does not need to be. There was no sense of anything continuing, no movement forward, no stillness to remain in, because nothing was there to move, or to stay. Even the absence of things had quietly disappeared. There was no silence, no calm, no peace, no emptiness, no fullness. All of these had gently faded, like something that was never there at all. There was no awareness to notice this, no presence to experience it, no thought to describe it, no feeling to hold it. Everything that could ever be known had already dissolved, without effort, without time, without any trace. There was no space, no direction, no distance, nothing near, nothing far, nothing inside, nothing outside, had no place to exist. There was no difference between something and nothing, because neither existed. There was no state, no condition, no stillness, no motion. Nothing remained to be anything at all. And yet, nothing was missing, because there was no need for anything to exist. There was no completion, no lack, no fulfillment, no absence. Nothing required anything. Everything that could be imagined had already faded. Every possibility, every meaning, every sense of being, gone. Not removed, not changed, just not there. There was no beginning, no ending, no middle, no passage between, nothing to arrive at, nothing to leave behind, nothing to remain. Only what cannot be formed, cannot be undone, cannot be known, and does not need to be. Even that, too close to something, so it faded, leaving nothing, not even nothing, just, there was no continuation, no sense that anything had ever been, no trace of what came before, no trace of anything at all, not even the softness remained, not even the fading. Everything that could be described had already disappeared. There was no silence, no stillness, no calm, no emptiness, no fullness, nothing to feel, nothing to notice, nothing to hear, nothing to smell, nothing to do, nothing to say, nothing to be. Even the idea of nothing had dissolved. There was no awareness, no observer, no presence, no absence, no space, no time, no sense of anything existing or not existing. All distinctions had ended without ever beginning. There was nothing to hold, nothing to release, nothing to allow, nothing to stop, only what cannot be spoken, and even that, too much. So it faded. No beginning, no ending, no middle, no flow, no stillness, no silence, no absence, no presence, nothing, and not even that. No thought, no awareness, no space for anything to arise, no place for anything to remain, no time for anything to pass, nothing forming, nothing dissolving, nothing existing, nothing not existing, no difference, no sameness, no anything, just, there was no there, no this, no that, no it. No word remained to point at anything, no meaning remained to hold anything, no existence remained to be anything, no absence remained to not be anything. Nothing had ever happened, nothing was happening, nothing would happen, and even that was too much. So even this faded, because it had never left. There was no beginning to it, no ending waiting ahead, no space around it, no center within it. Nothing moved, nothing rested, nothing remained, and yet nothing was gone. There was no silence to hear, no stillness to feel. Even those gentle ideas had already faded, without leaving a trace. No thought appeared, no feeling followed, no awareness rose to notice anything at all. There was no this, no that, no it, no word remained to point toward anything. No meaning remained to hold anything. Everything that could be named had already dissolved. Everything that could not be named had dissolved too. There was no time, no moment passing, no before, no after, no sense of now. Nothing forming, nothing fading, nothing existing, nothing not existing. All of it, beyond reach, beyond knowing, beyond even the idea of beyond. There was no calm, no peace, no rest, because there was nothing to disturb, nothing to settle, nothing to become quiet. Everything that could ever be had already not become. There was no awareness to recognize this, no presence to hold it, no absence to lose it, no space to contain it, no edge to define it. Nothing to say, nothing to leave unsaid, nothing to understand, nothing to forget. Even the softest trace of anything at all was not there. And not even not there, because even that would be something. And here, there was no something. There was no nothing. There was no silence. There was no stillness. There was no end. There was no continuation. Only what cannot be reached, cannot be known, cannot be lost, and does not need to be. Nothing began. Nothing followed. Nothing continued. And yet, nothing was missing. There was no sense of where anything could start, and no sense of where anything could end. No line to cross, no space to enter, no place to leave. Only something so soft that even calling it something felt like too much. So even that was gently released. There was no silence, because silence needs sound to be known. And here, there was no sound, and no silence either. There was no stillness, because stillness needs movement to be understood. And here, there was no movement, and no stillness. There was no calm, because calm belongs to something that could be disturbed. And here, there was nothing that could ever be disturbed. No thought appeared, not slowly, not quickly, not even for a moment, because there was no place for a thought to form, no mind to hold it, no awareness to notice it. And so, nothing came, nothing went, nothing stayed. There was no breath, no rise, no fall, no rhythm, no pause between. Not because breathing stopped, but because there was nothing to notice breathing at all. No body, no form, no boundary, nothing inside, nothing outside. If something could be remembered, it was not. If something could be imagined, it did not appear. If something could be known, it was never known. Everything that could ever be held had already faded, long before it could exist. There was no darkness, because darkness needs light to be understood. And here, there was no light, and no darkness. There was no space, no distance, no direction, no near, no far, no above, no below, no around. Everything that could define anything had quietly disappeared, without effort, without motion, without time. There was no time, no seconds passing, no slow, no fast, no waiting, no ending, no beginning, no middle, no before, no after. Even now had faded, because there was nothing for now to exist within. There was no awareness, no observer, no one watching, no one resting, no one drifting, no one sleeping, no one. And yet, there was no emptiness, because emptiness is something that can be known. And here, nothing could be known. Nothing could be unknown, be anything at all. If something could dissolve, it already had. If something could remain, it did not. If something could exist, it never began. Everything that could ever be had already become nothing. And even nothing was too much, too close to something. So even that faded completely. There was no end, because there was no start. No story, no path, no journey, no village, no river, no house, no Elias, no memory of any of it. Not lost, not gone, just never there. There was nothing to return to, nothing to leave, nothing to stay, nothing to become, nothing to understand, nothing to forget, nothing to feel, nothing to be, and even saying nothing was already too much. So that, too, slowly, gently faded away. There was no fading, no remaining, no disappearing, no not existing. Only what cannot be spoken, cannot be thought, cannot be known, and does not need to be. The story did not continue, because there was nothing left to continue from. No past, no memory, no trace of what had been. And yet, nothing felt missing. There was no return, no beginning again, no cycle, no movement forward, only something that had never moved at all. And there was no village now, no river, no house, no porch, no old man, no cat. Even the idea of them had gently faded away. Not lost, not removed, just never there. There was no silence, because silence needs sound, and here there was no sound and no silence. There was no stillness, because stillness needs movement, and here there was no movement and no stillness. No thought appeared, no feeling followed, no awareness rose to notice anything. There was no one to see, no one to feel, no one to rest. There was no time, no slow, no fast, no waiting, no ending, no beginning, nothing passed, nothing stayed, nothing existed within anything. If something could be imagined, it was not, did not return. If something could be known, it was never known. Everything that could be had already not become. There was no darkness, no light, no space between, no near, no far, no above, no below, no direction, no distance, nothing to be anything at all. And yet, there was no emptiness, because emptiness is something that can be felt. And here, nothing could be felt. Nothing could be unfelt. There was no ending, because there was no beginning, no continuation, no pause, no return. Only what cannot be reached, cannot be known, cannot be lost, and does not need to be. There was no next, no step after, no place to arrive, no direction to follow, because nothing had ever begun, nothing had ever moved, nothing had ever needed to. There was no trace of what once felt like a story, no memory of a village, no echo of a river, no image of a house, no sense of a person. All of it had quietly dissolved, not into something else, not into nothing, just gone, without leaving anything behind. There was no silence, no stillness, no calm, because all of these belong to something that exists. And here, there was no existence, no absence either. There was no awareness to notice this, no presence to hold it, no thought to describe it, no feeling to understand it. Everything that could be known was no longer there. There was no space, no distance, no direction, no near, no far, nothing inside, nothing outside. Even these ideas had faded. There was no time, no before, no after, no moment, no now, nothing passing, nothing staying, nothing beginning, nothing ending. If something could arise, it did not. If something could remain, it wasn't there. If something could fade, there was nothing to fade. Everything had already become beyond everything, and even beyond was too much. So that too disappeared. There was no end, because there was no start. Only what cannot be touched, cannot be known, cannot be reached, and does not need to be. There was no continuation, no sense of moving forward, no sense of stopping, at all, because nothing remained to be sensed. There was no silence, no stillness, no emptiness, no fullness. All of these had gently fallen away, like something that was never there. There was no awareness, no observer, no presence, no absence, nothing to notice, nothing to not notice, nothing, and not even that. There was no space for anything to exist, no time for anything to happen, no place for anything to remain, no form for anything to become. If something could be imagined, it did not appear. If something could be remembered, it was not remembered. If something could be known, it was never known. Everything that could ever be had already not become. There was no difference between something and nothing, because neither existed. There was no state, no condition, no stillness, no motion, nothing. And yet, nothing was missing, because there was no need for anything at all. There was no end, no final point, no last moment, because there was no beginning to lead here. Only what cannot be spoken, cannot be thought, cannot be understood, and does not need to be. Rain stopped. For the first time, the house was completely silent. Ethan stood still, now fully part of the house. But something felt different. A new feeling. He could feel every corner, every wall, every shadow, but suddenly a disturbance, like someone resisting. The new victim isn't normal. The boy inside the house was not reacting like others. He